One Israel Fund, beating to the rhythm of the heartland, enhancing and securing daily life in the Jewish communities of Judea and Samaria for over 25 years. Join us and make a difference.
Hi everyone, I am Eve Harow, Director of Tourism and Community Development for One Israel Fund, and I'm delighted to be talking today with Hillel Fuld, who is, what does Forbes call you?
A man transforming startup nation to scale-up nation. It's a little bit embarrassing, but...
Okay, but maybe describe for us, what does that mean?
What it means is that I think by now everyone is aware of the fact that Israel is a technology superpower. Traditionally, back in the day, Israel was very strong at cyber because of the military, right? Today, Israel pretty much dominates every sector of technology, and we are well known as startup nation. But if you think about it, what's startup nation? Startup nation means that people are building startups, and it doesn't mature to become a big company because they sell too early. And that was the case traditionally. Today, you know, just looking at the IPOs, the public offerings, the companies that went public to the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange, this year, for the first time ever, and this is a massive deal, for the first time ever, Israeli companies went public. The number of Israeli companies that went public surpassed the number of exits, which means we are no longer startup nation. Now we are, you know, Forbes called it scale-up nation. I call it unicorn nation because unicorns are companies that are worth $1 billion. It's just a phrase in tech. So it's really exciting because we're now graduating out of this small little ecosystem that builds cute startups and sells them for $50 million, $100 million to companies that are worth many, many, many billions. All the Israeli companies on Wall Street together are worth, want to take a guess?
I haven't a clue.
Take a guess. How much are all the Israeli companies on Wall Street worth together?
I don't know, $50 billion?
300.
$300 billion?
$300 billion.
Wow. So,
I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. You know, one of the statistics that people talked about a lot over the last couple of, let's say 10 years, was that Israel has more entrepreneurs per capita than any country in the world, which is great. But let's leave aside per capita because that's subjective. Objectively, absolute numbers. You look at NASDAQ, you look at the New York Stock Exchange, the country with the most companies on the public markets is the United States of America, 350 million people. The second one is China, 1.5 billion people. Number three?
Israel with 9 million.
Israel with 9 million, which is objectively outrageous. It's just outrageous. And so really it's never been this exciting in Israel. And I'm beyond blessed and fortunate to be meeting these remarkable, brilliant people who are building the future, who are trying to change the world for the better. And, you know, for me, it's just like, how did this even happen? How am I so lucky? But, you know, I feel very fortunate.
So the way I look at this is that there are no coincidences, especially when it comes to the Jewish people. So coincidentally, maybe what drove all this was the Russian Aliyah. We got 1 million when the Soviet Union fell apart, right? At the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s. We got 1 million highly educated people that a lot of people say were kind of the push behind this, in addition to the army and the intelligence units, and a lot of the people coming out, in addition to just the minds that we have here. And what amazes me is that here we are back in our country after quite a long time without the sovereignty.
A
couple thousand years, really, without being able to do our own thing. And we are positioned to have exactly what the world needs right now. Not necessarily oil fields, not necessarily diamond mines, brains. People who think out of the box, who think creatively, who are entrepreneurs. And here we are. And because of that exile, maybe we think a little bit creatively, because when you got thrown out of place after place, the only thing you took with you was what was between your ears.
Right.
Okay? And we always want to be highly educated. Part of that is from learning our traditions and the Torah, and part of it is just because that's how you managed to get ahead with what you knew, because you couldn't always have stuff. So here we are. So I really personally see this as a God thing, that he positioned us to still be a light into the nations, or to continue to be a light to nations in so many ways. So now when you talk about high tech, and we talk about it kind of in like high tech, can you parse it out a little bit? I mean, what are we doing? What are we doing? Is it medical? Is it computer? What exactly is happening here?
I just want to address the first thing you said, that there are no coincidences. A story that happened to me an hour ago, I promise you, I'm not exaggerating. I was sitting in Serona, right? It's our cafe. And I met with an investor that reached out to me via LinkedIn or something. I didn't have any context. I didn't know what he wanted from me. But okay, he seemed like a nice guy. I met with him. We had a cup of coffee. And what does he say to me? He says to me, this is what I'm looking to invest in. He gave me his criteria. And then I look to my left, and there's a woman who took my course. That I give a course on entrepreneurial, kind of all the challenges, etc. So I know her. And he says to me, I am looking for ABC. And literally, she marks all those boxes. And so I introduced them. And I mean, obviously it takes time to write a check, but it seems pretty optimistic. And I'm like, guys, there's a reason that you're sitting here and I'm sitting, like, the chances, you know? So I firmly do not believe in coincidences. That's first of all. Second of all, it's a fascinating question what you asked, because it's really hard to find any vertical or any sector of technology in which Israel is not a dominant player. And let me explain what I mean. I'm not saying that we're number one in the world. Right. Silicon Valley, is number one in many different sectors. But in every sector of technology, with no exception that I can think of, Israel is a dominant player. So maybe we're number 2 in the world, maybe we're number 3 in the world. And even the sectors that we were weak at, we were very weak at consumer tech, meaning apps, right? Because we're 9 million people here. How do you build a business on 9 million people? So that was our weakest link. That's changed too. I mean, you've heard of, I'm sure, many of the consumer apps and consumer companies that are built here, from Fiverr to Lemonade to Lightricks. I mean, you open up your app store anywhere in the world, look at the top paid apps on Apple, and 2 of them at least are developed here in Jerusalem. Anywhere in the world. So, there's pretty much no space in which Israel is not dominating. Having said that, you asked a very good question, because, we'll talk a little bit later about this, but I think the punchline, the thing that, for me at least, is the most impressive, is what's called impact technology, meaning not nonprofits. I'm talking about profitable companies. I'm talking about for-profits, right? That are making the world a better place. So whether it's healthcare, whether it's cancer research, whether it's mental health, million of it, that to me is like, okay, it's great that Google's here. It's great that billions of dollars are flowing into Israel. All of this is great. But if we're not making the world a better place, if we're not a light unto the nations, then what are we doing here? And so the amount of companies in this country, I can tell you stories you would not believe. I'll just give you one story, if I may. I met with a guy a couple of years ago named Dr. Rick Klausner. Dr. Rick Klausner is the utmost authority on cancer research. He was the guy, he was the director of the National Cancer Institute. Every president of the United States came to him and said, here's a blank check, cure cancer. Wow. He left the National Cancer Institute and he joined an Israeli company as a chairman. And this is a video you can watch on YouTube. So I'm not, you can watch it with your own eyes, because I'll tell you why. You'll see why I'm saying that, because it's shocking. I said to him, Dr. Klausner, we have self-flying drones. We have autonomous cars. We have robotics. We have artificial intelligence. Why can't we cure cancer? Right? I'm sure everyone asks themselves that question. Why have we not cracked cancer? And I'm sure he was going to say, because there's so many types of cancer and it's complicated. And he looked me in the eye. He said, we have. I said, what? And remember, this is on, you can watch this. If you think I'm making this up, watch it on YouTube. I said, what do you mean we have? He said, leukemia and several other types of cancer are cured. I said, what do you mean? He said, we've learned after 100 years of research how to rein in a person's immune system to kill his own cancer. Now, and this is a very big disclaimer, and I'll tell you why it's a big disclaimer in a second. Some of these treatments and cures are not necessarily readily available. They're not commercial. They're not FDA approved yet, but in the labs, we have cured them. Why am I saying this? Because I once gave a lecture in a New York school, and I told this story, and then someone in the audience came over to me afterwards and said, listen, my son-in-law has leukemia. Can you cure him?
Right.
And I'm like, oh my God.
Wow.
So I didn't give that disclaimer. So it's an important disclaimer. I'm not saying that people aren't dying of leukemia. They are. But we have medically, scientifically cured leukemia. When it will be available is a different story. But that's fascinating, but not as fascinating as what he told me next. I said to him, okay, so we've cured types of cancer. Where were these treatments and these cures developed? Hebrew U, IDC, Weizmann Institute, Bar Ilan, every single one of them in Israel. It blew my mind. And then about 2 or 3 months later, I had a meeting with a guy named Peter Cash with a K. We sat in
Great name.
Yeah, we sat in Mr. Broadway in New York. He's also one of the top experts on cancer research. I actually spoke to him last night, topic for another time, but amazing dude, amazing guy, just an amazing guy. And I sat with him, just for lunch, and we started to talk about cancer research, and he went down a list of about 20 to 30 different types of treatments that are deployed globally in hospitals around the world, all developed in Israel. Wow. I mean, I'll just give you one tiny little example, and I'm sure you know this because you come from the medical world. Cervical cancer, right? Cervical cancer is curable, 95% curable, but nobody gets tested. Why? Because the test is super intrusive, invasive, and it's not a comfortable test. So many, many women don't get tested, which is just crazy. You can be cured. So what did this guy named Ariel Be'eri do, an Israeli entrepreneur, originally American? He founded a company called Mobile ODT. And what is Mobile ODT? They've developed a device, hardware, that works with your iPhone and that can detect cervical cancer without any physical contact. I couldn't explain to you the technology behind it. No need to touch the person. And it works. And they're deploying it globally around the world.
Generally.
Women, yeah. No contact at all.
Wow.
Using some special light. I couldn't explain it to you, but this is just one example among hundreds. So to me, everything that's going on here, and we can talk more about that if you want, but to me, the punchline, the thing that's just unbelievably inspiring is that Israel, this tiny little country, a speck on the map in the worst neighborhood on earth, is literally, and people use the words changing the world as like a figure. Literally, we're changing the world. This is not an exaggeration. Across all the healthcare world, we can go into that if you want. Across AI, we're leading the way. VR, virtual reality, we're leading the way. Blockchain, which is a new thing, leading the way. Everything. And again, you got to put it in the context of, here we are, this tiny little country. And I would just address one more thing that you said. I agree with you that, our history takes a big part in the role in how successful we are, as does the military. But I like to joke, although it's not a joke. In most places in the world, if you're driving on the highway and you put on your blinker to go into the next lane, generally speaking, maybe with New York City aside, the driver slows down to let you in.
Israel aside also.
In Israel, what do we do? What do we do?
Up.
We speed up. Now, why is that? So we can make a joke about it, but why is that? What's the sociological, psychological, explanation of that? And I think maybe I'm overthinking here, but I truly, really believe this, that, the Jewish people throughout our history, we couldn't let people into our lane. We had to survive.
Interesting.
We had to survive. We had to use all our resources to survive. We were in constant survival mode for thousands of years. And here we are at home. We have this quote unquote excess of energy and resources. So what are we going to do? We're going to change the world. But we're not letting anyone into our lane. Because you know what? Last time we let someone into our lane, they massacred us.
All right.
I really believe that's
an
like a national
explanation.
trauma. By the way, it manifests in
we're-
many, many different ways in the army also. But
We're PTSD people. without a
100%. I think, I'll tell you, when my mom hears glass breaking, she goes into shock because my grandmother was in Kristallnacht.
Wow.
She wasn't there, but it's a national trauma.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of factors that contribute to our success in the business sector, but I really do believe that there's a social, historical element here.
DNA.
100%.
It's imprinted in our DNA. Absolutely. Well, that's why we talk about all those letters, OCD and ADD and all those things that in other places in here too can be seen as an impediment, but somehow here they're harnessed in such a way to make us a little bit more creative. I don't know. Maybe I'll.
No, so I agree with you. I always say my ADD is my biggest gift, but I don't think it's a little bit creative. And you talked about thinking out of the box. I think that's the understatement of the century. What do I mean by that? I don't think Israeli entrepreneurs think out of the box. I think Israeli entrepreneurs don't have a box. Okay, and I'll give you one example that I like to give because it's so out there and it is so outrageous that no human brain would think of this, but an Israeli entrepreneur did. Just one example. If you think about your office, your home office, your work office, we all have, these devices have evolved. Our computers are so much more powerful. Our mobile phones are supercomputers. Everything's evolved, except for one thing. There's this one device that sits next to your computer, and it's this big clunky thing, and you're like, I need to print something now. Oh man, I gotta dust. Why have printers not evolved? Why are they not this big? The answer is very simple. You need to put a paper into the printer. So it can't be smaller than a piece of paper, right? Comes along a guy named Tuvia Elbaum in Jerusalem, American originally. He says, wait a second. Why do you even have to put the paper into the printer? And you're like, well, how else will it print, right? Sit down for this. The guy built a mobile robotic printer that's this big. You put the paper down and you put the printer on it and it walks on the paper and prints.
Amazing.
It's this big.
Wow.
So the name of the company is Zuta Labs, and they're talking to some big companies who obviously I can't name right now, but that's just an example of who even thinks that way? Israeli entrepreneurs think that way. And another thing about Israeli entrepreneurs is if you tell, and of course I'm generalizing because life is about generalizations, but if you tell the average Asian entrepreneur or American entrepreneur, what you're trying to do is impossible. So they'll say, okay, let's figure out what to do. This is impossible, let's move on. And if they fail, at least in Asia, culturally, they're done. In Israel, you tell an Israeli entrepreneur something's impossible, it will be built in 2 days.
Right.
And if they fail, that's part of I can tell you, I personally had 2 failed startups. And I'm super proud of that because I learned tons from my failure. So failure here is not only not discouraged, it's encouraged.
It's also biblical. If you read the Bible, as opposed to all the other ancient books that we have, it's the only one that highlights our failures.
Interesting.
Okay, we lost this war, and this is why, because we weren't behaving properly, because we didn't this and we didn't that. That is really built into our code, is to learn from our failures and not swagger. That's one of the things that I've noticed here, and I'm surrounded by heroes in this country, and you are as well. You don't see a lot of swagger. All right, a lot of people are like, yeah, and this is how it goes.
Over the past, I'd say 5 years, something like that, I started to look at the Torah differently. I started to look at the Torah, whether it's Talmud, Daf Yomi, which I started recently, or the weekly Torah portion. I started to look at them from an eye of, not business, but global, a global perspective. And I realized that every single portion, every single page has lessons for the world. And so I started to post them on social media. Like, every Friday when I sign off for Shabbat, 25 hours offline, I posted Dvar Torah. I posted a piece of Torah, not for religious people. a piece of Torah with global lessons.
Right.
Every day I learn a daf, a page of Talmud, and I share a lesson. Now, sometimes the page is very technical, so it's hard to find a lesson, but I try. And it's always just, profound, global, and just incredible, deep lessons that people can really use on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
And so, I'll give you one. I haven't even posted it yet, but today, in today's page, it talks about the concept of getting a ruling from God or from person. Meaning, if God comes out of the heavens and say, from now on, you're not allowed to eat chicken, and we look at, one of our rabbis, and the rabbi say you're 100% allowed to eat chicken, who do we listen to? You'd think God said no.
No, you listen to the rabbi.
No, you listen to the rabbi, because God says, I'm giving you, as a human being, the ability to make a decision, the ability to have free choice, the ability to use the brain that I put in your head. Don't listen to me. I built the world. You do what you do. You do you. Because that's a Judaism. It's not a, this holy thing.
It's not about fate either. It's not about
us.
Like it's all dictated. We
what?
get to choose.
I can't tell you how many times, it happened to me the other day on LinkedIn, I think. I posted a question, should I share Torah lessons here on LinkedIn? And it was like a whole discussion. And one guy said to me, go ask a rabbi. And I'm like, what, ask a rabbi? What? Not everything needs to be, You have a brain, you have common sense, use your brain, But some people view it that way. That's not Judaism to me. Judaism to me is you were given abilities, you were given skills, use them.
Right. Exactly. And we were all given gifts. Each one of us were given a gift. How did you get into this? Because you are such, I hate to use the word ambassador because it's over. You can take it. I mean, they talk about
as long as you don't call me an influencer, I'm okay with that.
Okay, fine. No, because I feel that to some degree I'm an ambassador when I'm able to tour guide because we're showing in Israel, we're explaining things that you can't in any other way. How did you, Hillel Fuld, how did you get into this? Because you are so enthused, you are so passionate about this country and what we're producing, not just as an individual, but the people. I mean, you are about connecting people.
Right.
It's not about promoting yourself, it's about promoting the people that you have access to.
Right. So
how did you
we'll
get
talk
into
about
this?
that because it's a really important point that you just nailed. I don't even think you nailed it, but we'll talk about that in a second. But so I moved here when I was 15 with my family. Zionism was, in our veins since age 0. My dad was the principal of SAR in New York, and we came on a sabbatical year when I was in 6th grade. And the deal was, once you finish the sabbatical, you have to go back to SAR for 3 years to be the principal. You can't leave before 3 years are over. 3 years on the day we were on a flight to Israel, literally. So we made Aliyah 28 years ago, and again, I was brought up in a home of Zionism, of education, and of giving. And I started, I went to high school, went to the military, I was in artillery in the military, and I went to learn in yeshiva, and then I went to Bar Ilan University, and I studied political science, which obviously has nothing to do with what I do right now. I just found it to be interesting. I knew I wasn't going into politics, but I found it to be a fascinating degree, and I loved it. And then I finished my degree, and I was like, now what? I'm not going into politics. And by the way, rewind a couple of years, I turned on a computer for the first time, and I was like, holy cow, I need to work with this. It blew my mind. So I knew I was going to work in the world of technology. I had no idea how, because I'm not an engineer. So I finished this degree in political science, and I said, all right, now what? And someone said to me, you have English, right? You like to write, and you love technology. Go be a technical writer. Now, for those that don't know what a technical writer is, it's the guys who write the user guides you get with your iPhone that no one ever reads. Right. So it's a long story, but I took a course in technical writing, and in the course, the instructor said, and the instructor, she lives here, but she said this is a course for beginners. She said, don't go sending your resume for 10 years experience. You're starting off. Of course, the day I finished the course, I saw a position for 10 years experience at a very big tech company. So what did I do? I sent in my resume, thinking there's no way they're calling me. I'm completely unqualified. For whatever reason, I have no idea why, they called me in. They put me in front of a screen. And on the screen was an SME. What's an SME? A subject matter expert, an engineer, who's talking a third English, a third Hebrew, a third Russian, about the most complex things you can possibly imagine. Acronyms and what was the goal? To intimidate me and to see if I could answer questions. Now, remember, I love tech. So when this engineer said, and the MSISDN, to me, I was like, I know that an MSISDN is a phone number. It's just a fancy way of saying a phone number. I knew this stuff because I lived and breathed tech. So I answered the questions. I went home to my wife and I said, that was a fun experience, but clearly I'm not qualified. They called me back for a second interview, and then a third interview, and then a fourth interview. And on the 5th interview, literally, they called me and said, listen, you are super ADD. Can you really sit and write documents 10 hours a day? And I'm like, are you kidding? This was my dream since I'm a little kid, right? My dad always says to me, you're on a job interview, pretend it's the last job on earth. Anyway, I got the job.
Lie, in other words, yeah.
I got the job, and I was there for a couple of years, bored out of my mind. And one day I'm sitting at my little cubicle, and I said, this is crazy. I love tech. I love writing. What am I writing these user guides? So I opened the internet, and I started to write. The word blog did not exist back then. I definitely didn't know what my business model was. I was just writing. cup of coffee and a blog post every day without calling it that. And then people start to say to me, like, what's your end game? Like, what are you doing this for? Put ads at least, make some money. And I'm like, I have a job. This isn't a job for me. I love tech. I'm deeply passionate about it. I'm going to start writing about it. Within about 3 to 4 months, entrepreneurs started to reach out to me and say, listen, I read your article. I'd love to meet you. And that's when my imposter syndrome kicked in and has not stopped since. Because here I am, some random dude writing on a keyboard, and you're a brilliant CEO of a company. What the heck do you want from me? But I was like, you want to meet? Sure. So I meet with these entrepreneurs, and I quickly realized something. In Silicon Valley, there's the engineer and there's the founder. The engineer and the CEO. In Israel, it's the same person. And so when I'd sit with the CEO and I'd say, so what do you do? The answer to that question always began with, we've developed an algorithm. And I'm like, dude, stop. No one cares about your algorithm. What do you do? Like, what value do you bring to this world? They couldn't answer me. And I'm like, this is a brilliant human being who built like remarkable tech, and he can't tell me what he can't communicate. So I said to them, okay, stop. Here's your pitch. This is how you tell your story. And then I'd say to them, all right, who are your competitors? We have none. I'm like, are you for real? Like, you think no one else in the world is trying to solve the problem you're trying to solve? Are you like, so I told them who their competitors are. And then I'd say to them, all right, what's your go-to-market? Meaning you have this product, how are you gonna get into the hands of consumers? And I got the most absurd answers. They just had no clue.
That was known for a while, right? That Israelis were really bad at marketing.
This was early days. They've gotten a lot better. But, so they had no clue. So I said, all right, let me help. And again, there was no money. This wasn't a business. So I helped. Sometimes entrepreneurs would come to me and say, I want an introduction to an investor, introduction to Michael Eisenberg, who was my childhood friend. So I sent an email saying, Michael, do you want to meet this guy? Yes, boom, done. Took me 12 seconds, right? So the investor gains, the company gains, and I lost nothing.
Right.
So that's when people started to say to me, what are you, a friar? Because in Israel, being a friar is the worst thing you can be. I'm like, I'm helping someone. What did I lose,
But what did you gain?
I didn't gain anything.
Except for the satisfaction.
Yeah, but no, I did actually, I stand corrected. I did gain. Why? Because now the startup, I gained what's called social equity. Because now the startup loves me, knows what I did for them. The investor's like, wow, Hillel, thank you so much. And when the entrepreneur comes back to me and says, take 5% of the millions of dollars you just brought us, I'm like, I don't want your 5%. All I did was send an email, which was very uncommon in Israel, again, because people are afraid of being a friar. So when people said to me, like, why are you not taking money? The truth is, if I'm being honest, I didn't have an answer. It was a legitimate question. I didn't have a sophisticated answer. I said, I'm helping someone, whatever. Turns out, in retrospect, 10 years later, not taking money was the smartest thing I ever did. Why? Because when everyone around me was saying, pay me and I'll do something, I was saying, what are your challenges? You tell me your challenges. I say, all right, I'm going to fix them. I'm going to help them. I'll overcome them. Money? We'll talk about money. Money will come when you realize you need me. Till then, let me help. Wow. And so many of these companies came back to me, literally sometimes 10 years later, and said, listen, we know what you did for us. Now we're worth billions of dollars. We want to work with you. Name your terms, which is the most important words. Why are those the most important words? Because if I come to you and I say, pay me and I'll do something, you define the terms. Meaning, okay, you're going to do it for me, I'll pay you 5,000 shekel. Right. But if you come to me and say, I need you, now I define the terms. Right. I have the leverage. It's a very strange business model, but it worked. Anyway, long story short, it kind of grew and grew and grew and grew over the years. And today, what I do is I wear 4 hats. Hat number 1 is startups. When I say startups, till today, 98% of the companies that I meet don't pay me a dime. I also don't spend millions of hours on them, but if I can help them, don't pay me a dime. The 2% pay my whole investment, just like a venture capitalist. I don't make any money on the 98%, but the 2% that come back to me and say, we want to work with you, they return my whole investment. Okay, so that's hat number 1, startups. Hat number 2 is content. I produce a ridiculous amount of content on the internet, whether it's written content where I write for every leading tech publication, TechCrunch, The Next Web, VentureBeat, Inc. magazine, Entrepreneur magazine, Fast Company magazine. I write a ton. I produce a video blog that I, pre-COVID, was doing every day where I just interview the movers and shakers of the tech ecosystem in Israel. And the reason behind that was that I was in Silicon Valley and I was talking to executives at Apple and Facebook and Microsoft, and everyone knew Israel. Everyone was talking about Israel. I said, oh, you know Waze? They're like, oh, we love Waze. I'm like, oh, so you know Uri Levine, the CEO of Waze, the founder of Waze? They're like, never heard of him. I'm like, what do you mean you never heard of him? I'm like, you know Wix. They're like, oh, Wix is such an amazing company. I'm like, oh, so you know Avishai. Who's Avishai? I'm like, what? You know who Mark Zuckerberg is? You know who Jack Dorsey is? Why doesn't anyone know who Amnon Joshua is? I'm like, this is fascinating. I meet these people anyway. I'm going to bring a camera, start interviewing people. So I started my video blog up to episode 450 something. And then about a year ago, I started a podcast, an audio podcast where we interview people. We talk tech. We brought Naftali Bennett on. We brought the head of product at Waze on. We brought some amazing guests. And so that's the second hat, content. The third hat is just public speaking. I do a bunch of public speaking around the world about Israel, entrepreneurship, marketing, and my business philosophy, which is be a mensch and everyone will win. That's it. So that's, I mean, it's funny. You'd think it wouldn't be so unique, but it's a unique, it's a unique philosophy. Like, business is not a zero-sum game. Everyone thinks that if I take money out of my pocket and give it to you, I must be losing. That's not the case.
Right.
Everyone can win. So that's, and then the final hat is I work with multinationals like Google and Oracle and Huawei and a couple of others as a, for lack of a better term, brand ambassador. Everyone, they all call it something else. Google has a program called Google Developer Experts, where they bring experts into headquarters once a year. Huawei has a thing called Key Opinion Leaders. Oracle has an Oracle Startup Advisory Board. It's all the same thing. I work with these companies as like an ambassador. Some of them send me products. Some of them fly me out to California. Whatever it is, it's just a win-win. But bottom line, to sum up all my 4 hats, is I'm a kid in a candy store. I meet the most outrageous people every single day. And I'm going to add one more thing. I have massive imposter syndrome. I'm telling you the truth. Not a day goes by that I don't feel like this whole thing's going to come crashing down, because what have I done in my life? I love tech and I started to write about it. That's it. So it's something that I don't think I'll ever get over. I'm telling you the honest truth.
So I'm going to say that I think there's more here. It's not that you love tech so much, you love people.
That's true.
And you love your people, and you love this country. And I think that that's what drives you more than anything else. And I see when I read what you write about other people, that what comes through is what a nice person they are. All right? Because, all along it's like you have to be hard-nosed and mean to be a good businessman. You have to be cutthroat. Right. And you're approaching it differently. You're like, this guy is an amazing guy. This guy gives a lot of charity. This guy made sure at 2 a.m, even though he had a busy day the next day, that he went to visit a friend whose father just died. Whatever it is, you highlight the aspect that's not the money aspect of it.
Right. So it's an interesting
point. The
point.
menschy, if you will.
100%. It's an interesting point, because one of the words that don't exist in English, there are words that exist in English that don't exist in Hebrew. There are words in Hebrew that don't exist in English, right?
Right.
So one of the words that doesn't exist in English is firgun. You know what firgun means?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
to give props. Right? To just forget them, you should say something nice about someone. There's no such word in English.
Right.
It doesn't exist. Don't even try to think.
No,
There's no such word.
I know. My mind's working.
Honestly,
it's like not happening.
I built my whole career on that, because without getting too deep into the marketing philosophy, if I build a stage, whether that stage is virtual or physical, and I get to decide who stands on that stage, what does that say about me? That says I'm the owner, right? And so when I write a post talking about another person, I'm basically letting that person stand on my stage, right? And so without mentioning a word about myself, I get promoted, because if my feed is full of rock stars, and the only thing they have in common is that they're all standing next to me, well, what does that say about me, right? So it's a marketing tactic. Having said that, pre-COVID, I would meet people, take a selfie, write about them, promote them, great. Comes COVID, I have no more face-to-face meetings. I'm like, I'm not stopping this. So I started to do daily features on people where I would, post a picture of us together and talk about, who they are, what they do, etc. And it's fascinating, because, again, this wasn't a business. It's like, I just did it because I like doing it. Cannot even imagine the amount of messages that I've gotten from people. Feature me, I'll pay you. I'm like, I'm featuring people that I know. I'm not featuring strangers.
I'm missing the points. Yeah,
a little bit. So yeah, I mean, honestly, I could say it from now. Being a mensch in business is the best business model, because I'll tell you my whole entire philosophy in one mathematical equation. When I focus my time and resources on value, now what does value mean? It could mean connecting you to my uncle who's an investor. It could mean connecting you to a journalist. It could mean helping you with your pitch. Whatever it is. When I focus my time and resources on helping you, the entrepreneur, win in any way, you have no expectations. You're not paying me. So if you have no expectations, all I can do is exceed expectations. Now, when I exceed expectations over and over and over and over again, I create delight. It's delightful. These entrepreneurs come to me with like hearts in their eyes. Now we can talk money, because anything that brings you delight in your life, you'll pay for. A good cup of coffee, you'll pay for it. So I'm in the business of delight. Let me delight. And if money doesn't come back, okay. What did I lose? I lost nothing. A couple of emails, big deal. They bought me lunch. Who cares? But again, it's a very not Israeli mentality. From my perspective, I always say that business is like a candle. A candle has fire. It gives its fire to another candle. It loses nothing. Right. It just creates more fire in the world, right? And I once said, this is a funny story. I once said this to a guy named Christoph, clearly not Jewish, at IBM Ventures, okay? We were talking. I said, business is like a candle. If you don't give your... He says to me, Hillel, I'll take it one step further. He says to me, if you don't give your fire, you're going to end up burning out yourself. I was like, Christoph, you should be a Hasidic Rebbe.
Totally. That's a beautiful...
It's a beautiful addition, right?
It's a beautiful addition.
It's true. At the end of the day, business is not a zero-sum game. If you help others win, you end up winning. Period. Full stop.
So I'm sitting here as somebody... First of all, we're sitting here in my home in Efrat.
Beautiful home.
Thank you. Deeply involved with Yehuda Shomron, not just through Win Israel Fund, through virtually everything that I do in my life, and a lot of political activism in the last few decades. And I'm thinking to myself, we need you as the brand ambassador for Judea and Samaria. Because, we've talked about this before. We talked about Israel and the kind of dichotomy between people understanding that Israel is this incredible place to do business, even while they don't really like Jews that much. So there's this like weird thing that's going on in the BDS movement and all kinds.
What's that word in psychology? It's a dissonance.
Dissonance,
You
exactly.
like that?
Very nice.
Thank you very much.
So there's a dissonance when it comes to Israel, as you so eloquently described, what Israel's doing for the world. And I think about Yudav Shomron. I think about Judea and Samaria, the people living here, whom I know very, very well, many of them, and I go around to the different communities, and the people here are outstanding. But the image that's out there is so different from what's actually happening here.
Right.
If you could be the ambassador for Yudav Shomron, let's just like take it there. It's not a business. Well, it's more than a business. It's our heartland. It's not just the biblical heartland. It's where so many things are going on here now. It's in the headlines all the time, usually not for positive reasons. I mean, we even have Israel's own, interior, whatever he is, the minister of police, who is emphasizing the very small number of people who don't behave the way they should and who we come after for not behaving the way they should, as opposed to everything that's happening here. If you could, even for a week, give advice or take over the PR, as it were, for Yudav Shomron, what would you do?
It's interesting because we share a lot in common in that regard. I mean by that I live in Beit Shemesh. When I tell these secular people that I work with, I live in Beit Shemesh, what do you think they think? About the ultra-Orthodox Jews throwing stones.
Right. Shabbos.
There are about 300 people in the entire city who do that.
Right.
It's a beautiful, gorgeous city with unbelievable mountains, but that's all they think. And so I've become the unofficial ambassador of Beit Shemesh. I'm like, guys, stop it. It's not what you think. Come visit. And they come visit. They're like, holy cow, this is gorgeous. It's literally one of the most beautiful places in the entire country. So now, we share that in common. Listen, I don't know that I have an answer about how to, improve the image of Yudav Shomron. I don't have a specific answer, but I will say this. I met with Peter Lerner. I don't know if you know who that is. Many years ago, he was the spokesman of the IDF, amazing guy. I met with him when he was in the spokesman's office. He was the spokesman. And we talked, and I said, what are we going to do? Like on Twitter, there's 100 million of our enemies who are just saying whatever.
Lies.
Israelis are raping girls. Like what? They don't care about truth. It's not even an ideal of theirs. They just don't stick to the truth. And we have to stick to the truth. And we're 300 people, and there are 300 million people. What do we do? He asked me that, and I said, listen, the numbers will never win.
No.
But I want to believe, as a Jew and as a person, that truth does prevail, eventually. And I don't know when that eventually will happen. So, the only thing I can say is there's some battles you're not going to win. You're not going to win by debating a person on Twitter or on Facebook. No. You are going to win by making the world a better place. And so many incredible things go on in Yehuda Shomron that I don't think get enough publicity. Whatever it may be, whether it's wineries, whatever it is,
God, the food
charities,
scene, forget it.
So that there should be, in my humble opinion, I'm sure there are many websites. From my perspective, though, there should be JudeaandSamaria.com. And on JudeaandSamaria.com is literally anything and everything that shows the power of the community here. Because like you said, there is no one in this country that are just better quality people than here. This is the cream of the crop. And so, again, the world talks about it, the West Bank, it talks about settlers. The world doesn't know the other side because, honestly, we stink at PR. So, it's very nice to throw out a tweet. If there would be a centralized resource where I could say, what is going on in Yehuda Shomron? What is happening in Judea and Samaria? Boom, JudeaandSamaria.com, everything. It could have tabs, charity, mental health, hospitals, whatever it is. But all the things that are meaningful and powerful that are happening in Judea and Samaria should be centralized in one place so that there's no debating it. Look, it's right here. You want the number? Call them. Look at their Twitter account. It's all there. So to me, that's, and of course, obviously, it needs to be magnified and amplified and distributed using social media because I don't need to tell you social media is a megaphone, the likes of which we've never had. I can tell you stories that have happened to me you would not believe. So, you have these platforms, and if there's content to distribute, it does well. And I think there's a ton of content here. It's just not centralized. It's very fragmented. It's very all over the place. There should be a central, and there might be, by the way, I don't know if there is, but either way, again, I don't know, JudeaandSamaria.com, is there even such a website? There should be. There should be, with everything there. Like even, it's a bad comparison, but even at Beit Shemesh, there's Shemesh Phone, which has all service providers. It's not the same. I'm not saying it's the same, but there should be a centralized location where if a person wants to know the truth about what's going on in Judea and Samaria, he Here it is right in front of your eyes. That would be the first thing I would do.
That's the problem, though, with social media also, is the truth is based on whoever just
but
put it up there. I
There's
mean,
no
you know
challenge.
what
What's the problem to do that?
because there's constantly detractors and people that are putting things out. Look, what Israel Fund has done is picked a niche, which is the niche is to make life better for the people living here so that people will stay and that more people will come. Sometimes a playground in the community is what it'll take. A medical center in Binyamin is what we're doing now. Just because the quality of life here is really phenomenal. You're familiar with these communities.
100%.
There's still communities where people don't lock their doors. Still communities where if you have a baby or on the flip side, your father dies or you need some help and you're sitting Shiva, you're just inundated with love and with people coming in.
So let me tell you a story that happened to me last week, and I don't want to get too political, but I think this is an important story that illustrates the complexity.
I've been known to go down that path, okay.
It illustrates the complexity, or I should say the lack of, the double standard, let's call it. So I was visiting my brother here in Judea and Samaria in Tekoa, and we had a Hanukkah party. And luckily, you'll understand why in a second, we came in 2 cars. My wife came in her car, I came in my car, which is something we don't usually do. And on the way back, on the roads that are not exactly Jewish friendly, let's just say understatement of the century, my Waze went crazy. My Waze had no idea where I was. It was showing me off-road. It was telling me to make U-turns into Palestinian villages. It had no idea where I was. My first thought was, now I understand how these people make wrong turns and get lynched in Ramallah because we depend on Waze for this stuff, and Waze completely lost it. I'm telling you, I was terrified. I didn't know how to get home. If my wife had not been 2 cars in front of me, I probably would not be here today, if I'm being honest. Just a couple of days before, someone made, these 2 Hasidic Jews made a wrong turn and were almost lynched to death, right? So, that was one of the scariest things in the world. But, then you think about it, and you see these signs. You see these signs on the entrance to Palestinian villages. Jews are not allowed to drive here. Israelis, you can't enter. It's like, imagine a place where I said, Asians, you can't come here. Blacks, you can't come. It's absurd. And then we see people, Palestinians, walking around. By the way, I got to say, again, I don't want to get too political, but let's not call it Palestinians. Can we call it Arabs, please? Because
Whatever
it's important. No, it's important. Like, this is words matter. And if anything I learned from Ari, we'll talk about Ari, but if there's anything I learned from Ari is that words matter. And, they call themselves Palestinians. It doesn't mean I have to fall for their trick, right? There's no such thing as an Arab-Palestinian state. There never was, there never will be. It's a joke. Yasser Arafat, an arch terrorist, made up that word in 1967. And we're all like, oh, Palestinians. No, Palestine was a Jewish country with coins that say the menorah on them. Let's not, okay? So I'm going to say Arabs. There are these signs, no Jews allowed. No, Israelis can't drive here. And then Arabs walk around freely in our malls. This morning, I went to buy candy in the mall in Sarona in Tel Aviv. Big burqa. Literally. I'm like, what? Can you imagine me selling it? It's just, there's no, and even despite all that, we're still the oppressor. Right. That's what I'm saying. There's no integrity here. There's no truth.
Well, that's what I was saying about the truth, that we can say the truth, but then because people aren't here and aren't seeing for themselves, so they get taken down into a pack of lies. And you brought up Ari. So one of the things. One more thing.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Absolutely.
You can debate opinion. You can't debate facts. If I show you that there's a business here that takes care of special needs kids, here's the address, and here's the phone number, there's no denying that. It's a fact. So if we show it and we display it in a way that there's no debate, then they'll have a harder time debating it. Whereas right now it's like, Israel's the most moral country, most moral army in the world. Okay, we know that's true, but that's a subjective opinion, right? When it's fact, it's fact. You can't deny that. So to me, I think we need to move a little bit closer to the fact and leave opinion on the side. Just my opinion.
Well, what's been so frustrating about the last 2 years and the world essentially closing down to a great degree because of COVID is not being able to show people the facts. When people come here and I take them to these places, and what you said is very true and something I fight against. A lot of times people don't want to come into these areas because they're afraid. So one of the things the One Israel Fund does is try and lower the fear factor by providing security, cameras and things like that so that people understand that everything is going to be okay. Yeah. So, but what that means is that the bad guys win, because by attacking and by making us afraid, then we don't go in and really make 100%. Our opinions. And that's something that we have to fight against all the time.
Tremendous
it's something
problem.
That I've tried to do to turn awe away from fear and into the wow, because there's a tremendous wow in Yudav Shomron. And you mentioned Ari before. So Ari, your brother, Ari Fuld, who, as I'm sure if not all, then most of our listeners know, was on the Kitat Konanut, who was on the the emergency squad, which is all volunteers here in Efrat, and someone who was very out there in physically protecting Jews, doing reserve duty, even though he wasn't a little kid anymore, and he was married, and he had every reason to not do it anymore. Always volunteer. And not only that, but doing what he could in terms of speaking, going out as much as he could, doing it from his home. Even before COVID, he was giving, like on Zoom on Fridays, he was giving a little Dvar Torah, and doing whatever he could to get the truth out to the world. And he was murdered, not far from here, by a child, an Arab child, who knifed him in the back. And in terms of heroes, the last thing that he did was save somebody else's life. All right, as everyone knows, as he's losing all his blood, and maybe he could have saved himself, he chased down the terrorist and prevented the terrorist from killing someone else.
Who then became a part of the Fuld family, by the way.
Who then I know became part of the Fuld family. And for the people who don't know, so Ari's daughter Tamar grew up a great deal in this house. She's best friends with one of my daughters, and she's really like one of my own. She's got the code to the house. She knows the shelf in the freezer where her cookies are, and she's really a part of the family. So for many of us, Ari was Ari, somebody that we knew, and then he became, to some degree, a hero and larger than life afterwards. His legacy, in my mind, is to not be afraid, all right? Especially because of how he died. Is to not let the murderers and the evil ones dictate how we live, is to further encourage settlement in Yehuda v'Shomron, building in Yehuda v'Shomron, holding on to these places, because otherwise evil wins. And I mean, I do believe from what I knew of him that would have been what he was saying to us now is, don't be afraid because of what happened to me. Come in, and that's what I try and do. I try and bring people specifically to the place where he was killed, and we have lunch there. We talk about him, and we eat lunch there, and we watch the Arabs and Jews all shopping there together, and we live. And we make sure that it continues, despite the way he was killed, maybe because of the way he was killed. But as his brother, how does that affect you and what you do?
How long do we have? Just kidding. So Ari and I grew up together in the same house because we're 5 boys, and the oldest were out of the house, and 8 times was a little kid. So me and Ari grew up together. And, you know, at the Shiva, my dad said something that blew my mind. And I don't know if you heard this or not, but it's worth repeating. When he was born, by now it's, let's say, 50 years ago. They yeah, right, 46 years ago, around 50. They named him Ari. Now, Ari in Hebrew means a lion, but when people were called Ari back then, it was a short name for Aryeh. Right. Ari was it wasn't a common name. Okay, people said to my parents, like, "Why are you calling him Ari? What's that?" I said, "We like the name. That was it. They didn't name him because of it. They just liked the name." As Ari grew up, he developed some certain very dominant characteristics. For starters, he moved here to Israel before the family, volunteered for the IDF, climbed up the ranks, carried around the MAG, which is a machine gun literally built for tanks. Oh, yeah. Like, it's meant to sit on a tank, and he carried it around. He was an ox, right? He was a 4-3 black belt in karate. He moved here, and he literally, old school, conquered this land. Really, okay? You know, people say hero, and he was literally, okay? Yeah. So that's the first thing. Second thing, I would wake up sometimes at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'd see him debating people on Facebook, like some anti-Semite, and I'd say, Ari, you're not going to convince him. Go to sleep. And he'd say to me, it's not about convincing him. It's about the 1,000 people watching this dialogue from the sidelines that now get to hear the truth. That was his answer. But he didn't sleep. I am telling you, I don't know where the guy slept. He did not sleep. It was unbelievable. That's the second thing. The third thing, you knew him. He was a normative guy. Like, you wouldn't stop on the street and be like, that guy's weird. He was a normal guy. But he had certain things that he was incredibly, incredibly passionate about. Davening, prayer.
Yes.
Like I said, he was a 4-3 black belt, so when many other people shuckle when they pray, he would stand there like a brick wall. You couldn't even move him. He was deep in meditation, really. Yeah. And one specific prayer that he was incredibly passionate about, and I don't know why, was Shema, which is probably the most important prayer in Judaism.
The hero Israel.
Right. And there are videos of him in the Muslim quarter yelling on a megaphone, Shema Yisrael. And again, that sounds a little crazy, but if you knew him, you knew that was not the type of person he was. He was I'm saying he wasn't soft-spoken, but he wasn't like crazy. That's a crazy thing to do. He was so passionate about Shema. Another thing he was passionate about was tzitzis, the fringes for your clothing. He had an ongoing debate with a big rabbi about whether to wear the blue string or not blue string. Right. He was very, very passionate about it. So those are a couple of things that characterized him. I'm now going to take out my phone and read something to you, if I may.
Please.
After he was murdered, my parents opened up the Tanakh, the Bible, and they found that in the entire Bible, The word Ari appears twice. The entire Torah. Okay, I'm not talking about the prophets, I'm talking about the Torah itself. I think I screenshotted it. Here it is. Okay, ready for this? Because this is, I mean, you're going to get goosebumps.
Okay.
Guarantee you. I'm not kidding. Okay, so there are two mentions. The first one says, Kara shachav ke'ari. They crouch, they lie down like a lion. Uchilavi mi'ikimenu, like the king of beasts. Who dare rouse them? Mivarechacha baruch v'orecha arur. Blessed are they who bless you. Cursed are they who curse you. That's black on white. That's the verse. Okay. Now, if I were to ask you, define lion. What does Ari mean to you? What is the word lion? What does it mean? You would say it's the strongest beast. It's the strongest animal. It's the
King
kingdom,
of the jungle.
Right. That's what we. Sit down for this. I'm reading word on word. I could show it to you if you don't believe me. Kara shachav ke'ari. Kitargumo. This is what Rashi, the biggest commentator on the Torah, says. What is shachav ke'ari? What is Ari? Kitargumo, like Onkelos. What does Onkelos say? How does he define lion? I'm reading word for word. You ready for this? Sit down.
I'm sitting.
Yityashvu be'artzam bekoach uvigvura.
Wow.
They'll settle their land with strength and heroism. That is a lion. That was Ari. But hold on, it gets a lot crazier. If you don't have chills yet, just wait. The second time the word Ari appears in the Torah, and I'm reading word for word. Hein am kilavi akum, lo, a people that rises like a lion. Uche'ari nasa, leaps up like the king of beasts. Listen to this, you ready? Lo yishkav, he won't sleep. Ad yochal teref, until he consumes his prey. He won't sleep. That is a lion. And what does Rashi say? This is going to blow your mind. I'm not making this up. You could read it. Hein am kilavi akum, you ready for this? When they wake up, when a lion wakes up in the morning, they overcome like a lion to grab the commandments of the Torah. And which examples does Rashi give?
Wow. The things that Ari did.
That was his autobiography. My parents didn't even know this when they named him, but that was Ari's autobiography. That tells his entire story. It is remarkable how a single human being was able to impact millions of lives. And I'll tell you one more thing. When my grandparents were in Auschwitz, do you think in their wildest dreams, in a million years, they thought that their grandson would become a national hero of the state of Israel? Can you even imagine? If I told them that, they would have been like, you're on drugs. Like, what are you even saying? A national hero of the state of Israel. My brother. It's wild. So the truth is, like you said, in his last breath, really, the doctors don't even know how he did this. Because,
last beat of his heart.
Yeah, he had, the knife was in his main artery. He was dead on the spot. But somehow he managed to run 50 meters, jump over a wall, and shoot the guy. He didn't kill him. He's in jail, hopefully for the rest of his life. But, they invited us to the trial to see whatever. And I was like, I can't look at this guy in the face. But I'll tell you on a personal level, the day I found out was, people speak of the word trauma. I don't think someone that's never, experienced trauma doesn't really understand what that means. Mm-hmm. I can tell you on a personal level that I was at some startup's office that morning, and in between tests, I opened up Ynet, the biggest, news website in Israel, and I saw the main headline, terrorist attack in Gush Etzion. And there was a surveillance video. So what do you do when you see a big play button? You hit play. So I watched this video of a guy coming behind this big dude, stabbing him in the back, the guy running and shooting him, and I said to myself, who the heck is this Superman? Who is this guy? So I asked in the Fuld family group, in the WhatsApp group, is everyone okay? And then I got a phone call from Donnie, who's one older than Ari, and says, words that I'll never forget for the rest of my life. It's him. I don't know if you remember us burning discs. Remember burning CDs? These memories of those moments are burned on my brain forever. Now, I didn't know at that point that he was dead. So I ran, obviously closed up on myself, ran to Shari Tzedek, the hospital, and on the way, Donnie said to me, don't rush. And I may or may not have yelled a 4-letter word in the car, which I don't often do, but then we got to the hospital. We were in the side room that's dedicated to families of terror victims, and slowly but surely his kids started to come in, our family started to come in, and every time we had to break the news, and I can't think of a more traumatic thing than that. The interesting thing is, and this is something I don't speak about often, is that what happened that day, I remembered the details like such like small details that are insignificant. There's nothing I forgot about that day, nothing. The day later, the week later, the month later, I don't remember a thing. Psychologists call it selective amnesia because you block it out. I'm telling you, if you tell me right now that a month after Ari was murdered, I went to Aruba, I believe you. I don't remember a thing. Not a thing. So it was crazy, and another thing is that people don't speak about the family of victims. People speak about terror victims, but nobody speaks about what it does to a family. And thank God my family is super duper strong. We have a phenomenal family, but no, I'm not going to say it broke us, but we're not. It will never be the same. You know what I mean? We're five boys, very like unity, very strong kind of gibush, as we say in Hebrew.
Right.
And again, I'm not saying we're sitting and wallowing in our sorrow. We're not. We're trying to do what we can. And Miriam is an absolute hero.
His widow.
Miriam's just a different level. I don't know what she's made out of, but I need to learn from her.
She's really something.
But the bottom line is, we're all trying to do our part in this world, but. Again, not to get too mushy and sentimental here, but the sadness never goes away. Like it's there. Like let's transition a little bit into another topic. We want to talk about mental health. I can tell you that after he was murdered, I'll tell you a really nice story. I was in bed. I couldn't move, and so a friend who sold this company for $300 million, was obviously worth a lot of money, reached out to me and said, "Listen, come to Tel Aviv. I want to meet you." And I said, "Listen, man, I love you, but I'm not doing business meetings. Not now. Like not even close." And this is a guy who's a very soft-spoken, not aggressive, very sensitive and gentle kind of guy. And he said to me, "Hillel, please come." I was like, that's not like him at all, but okay. I said, all right. So I come to Tel Aviv, I meet him. And I got to tell you that for the first, let's say, month after the murder, my biggest concern was how to support my family. I'm one person. I support the family.
Right.
How am I going to do that? I can't even get out of bed. I can't put on socks in the morning.
Functioning.
I was terrified. That was my biggest fear, if I ever get back to myself. So this guy calls me. I come meet him in Aroma in Tel Aviv, and he sat me down. I sat across like we're sitting right now. He says to me, "Hillel, me and the hundreds of people that you've helped over the years, we are not going to let you fall." I started to cry, and I went home. I think it's an actual accurate statement to say that he saved my life. Listen, I wasn't, God forbid, suicidal, but I had no optimism left in me. I had no joy. I had no anything. When he told me that, and I knew I had a comfort, like a cushion.
Right.
It changed everything. And then, and I'm not a superstitious kind of guy, right? I'm a pretty down-to-earth, normal guy. But Friday afternoon, someone knocks at my door, person I don't know. He says, "You need to read this book." And he leaves. I said, "Okay, thank you." I read the book. The book is called Option B. It's a book written by Sheryl Sandberg, who was the chief operating officer at Facebook.
Right.
Her husband was in the gym one day and just dropped dead. Just dropped dead. So she wrote a book called Option B. Option A is sorrow. Option B is live life. And I read it. It was a great book. But one sentence in that book blew my mind. Because, your friends want to be there for you. You lost your brother. They want to help you. And everyone was amazing. But the question that I got most often was, what can I do? Now, I can't figure out what socks to put on in the morning. I can't tell you what to do. Don't ask me what to do. Just do.
Do it.
So in the book, she writes that someone called her in the hospital and says, "Cheryl, what don't you want on your hamburger?"
Wow.
Meaning, I'm bringing you a hamburger, but what don't you want on it?
Should I leave the pickles off?
Exactly. And I was like, that is so spot on. You want to help me? Don't ask me. Just do. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm throwing people under the bus. People were phenomenal. But it's a lesson. When someone has loss, don't ask them to make decisions. They can't make decisions. Decide for them. Take into account their preferences. What don't you want on your hamburger? But don't ask them to decide what they want for lunch. It sounds so trivial, but it's not. You can't make decisions. Your brain is somewhere else. So that was something that between that one sentence that guy said to me in that book, again, I wasn't, God forbid, suicidal, but it saved my life. It really, really saved my life. But again, it doesn't
the
go
fact
away.
that you talk about this, though, I mean, Ari was brave in one way, and I think you're very brave in another, because you have brought up more than once on the social media platforms that you are on that a lot of people follow. You brought up subjects that a lot of people shy away from, like mental health. That's still one of the big taboos,
right. And
it's there. And, we live in a country, and it's not just here, it's everywhere in the world, where people are suffering.
Yeah.
People are suffering. Maybe it's a built-in depression, and there's really no practical reason for them to be suffering. Or maybe something happened that really did.
How vulnerable do we want to get here?
However you want to.
I mean, so after Ari, a month, 2 months, whatever, I went back to work. Why did I go back to work? Because I love what I do, and I wanted to distract myself. I didn't want to think.
Right.
And I thought to myself, I'll always be distracted. When am I ever going to be alone with my thoughts? There's always distractions.
Sure.
Little did I know that there was a pandemic coming. So here I am at home with my thoughts. It was not pretty. Combine that with my routine going from 100 miles an hour to 0 overnight and other personal, all at once, I went into deep clinical depression. I'm the happiest person in the world. I never, ever dealt or knew anyone that dealt with this stuff. And again, I couldn't move. My wife made me a cup of coffee. I couldn't pick it up. I'm not exaggerating. I could not leave the house. I was paralyzed. And I said to myself, many people are suffering from this. I spoke to a psychiatrist. She said half this country's on antidepressants. The thing is, though, I said to myself, I have a platform. Everyone else is sweeping it under the rug. It's an important discussion. I could either do what everyone does, or I could actually leverage my platform and talk about this important topic. So, thank God I went to therapy. I'm taking meds and everything like that, and I'm functioning. And I'm going to be, again,
Drinking
very
your coffee again. Yeah.
No, I'm going to be very vulnerable and say that the sadness is still there deep down. I wrote, one of the things people said to me is, when you're depressed, write a journal. And I wrote a journal, and then 6 months later, when I was quote unquote better, I went back to that journal to read it, and it was, number one, I don't remember writing it. But number two, it was, to say dark is such an understatement. I'll just give you one example. I wrote in the journal that I feel like I had a balloon in my stomach full of black liquid that exploded. I felt like I was black. Inside, just black. That's how I felt. So first of all, again, stuff doesn't go away. You could treat it, but the sadness is there, and I think it will always be there. But I said to myself, I'm going to use my platform. This is crazy. So I started to write about it. I started to write about Israeli companies that are, trying to solve the mental health issues. And, one of the things, for example, among many other problems, one of the biggest problems, I think, is that the way mental health is treated is you go to a psychiatrist, they give you antidepressants, they say, come back in 8 weeks, let's see if it worked. Like, I can't function. Give me comfort. Don't tell me to come back. What am I, guinea pig? It's horrible. There's no personalized medicine. Whereas the rest of the world, you have a headache, I know what to do. You're depressed, don't know what to do. Come back in 8 weeks. It's crazy. So there are many companies trying to fix that as well. But the bottom line is I started to write about mental health, and don't kid yourself. I got a ton of messages from people saying, you got to stop talking about it. Really? No one's going to work with you. And I'm like, you know what? If someone doesn't want to work with me because I'm depressed and my brother was murdered, don't want to work with them. And I'm going to be conservative here and say that I've gotten 5,000 messages from people saying, you have given me a voice. I was terrified to talk about my depression, about my anxiety, you have given me a voice. And so that, generally speaking, for me, and not only in this realm, but in all realms that I write about, is the most satisfying thing in the world. When I write about a certain topic and people say to me and thank me, I couldn't talk about it. It's the fact that I'm using my
legitimized it to some degree.
Yeah, destigmatized it.
Right.
It's this massive. I'm not. By the way, I did not destigmatize it. It's still a massive stigma.
No, but
I think people are, at least in my network, are a little bit more comfortable talking about it. But at the end of the day, I try to use my platform for good. Don't think that it doesn't come at a price. I've had my fair share of hate on the internet, whether it's anti-Semitism. I spoke to the CEO of Twitter, who just left actually, Jack Dorsey, and I said to him, how do you allow this poison on your platform? And he literally wrote me back and said, we are dealing with it. This was years ago, and obviously he didn't deal with it.
Yeah.
But there's blatant anti-Semitism on social networks. I don't need to tell you that. I'm not talking about free Palestine, which is different discussion, but literally kill all Jews.
The Nazis didn't finish the job, yeah.
It's all over the place. And so that's another thing that I try to communicate and say, listen, guys, these Silicon Valley investors who are blatantly anti-Semitic but invest in Israel because in their mind there's this and there's this. There's one Israel. Stop it. There's no, Israel that kills Palestinians and Israel that's saving the world. There's one Israel. And if you think that the same Israel that's developing cancer research is killing Palestinian kids, then you have to go get checked out because it's one Israel and we're doing good. Do we make mistakes? Of course we make mistakes. Do we own up to our mistakes? Yes.
We're human.
But we own up to them.
Right.
When, God forbid, an innocent life is lost on the other side, we own up to it. We make mistakes. But to compare that to just, it's the whole essence, I don't even know what to call it. Their whole existence of our neighbors, of our cousins, of our enemies is false. The entire thing. Look at this again. This isn't my opinion. Look at the charter of the Palestinian Authority. Right. What does it say? From the river to the sea, they want Israel. There's no settlements. Tel Aviv is theirs. So let's not kid ourselves. And the irony of it all. Is, if let's say I'm a person who's pro-Palestinian, I'm saying, give them what they want. They deserve a state. But they're saying to kill all the Jews. No, they don't mean it. Hold on, are they adults or are they kids? If they're adults, treat them like adults. Listen to what they're saying. They're saying kill all the Jews. Are you okay with that? You're okay. If you're okay with that, fine. If you're not okay with that, then how are you in the same breath saying give these people a state? We gave them a state. Gaza, what happened? Tens of thousands of rockets. So what did Einstein say? A fool is the person who makes the same mistake again and expects a different outcome.
Right.
Well, what do you think is going to happen if we give them more land? All of a sudden they'll be peaceful? This isn't a question of, and this is another big problem, this isn't a question of land. This is a question of Western versus Eastern civilization. This is a clash of civilizations. There's an author who wrote a book called Clash of Civilizations. I don't remember who it is, but that's what this is. It's not, anybody who differentiates, who?
Huntington, maybe?
Yes, I think so. Anybody who differentiates, between ISIS and Hamas is kidding themselves. Their charters are You can read them word for word. Nobody wants a state. If they wanted a state, they could have had it 10 years ago. They don't want a state. They want dead Jews. And they say it. It's not like if they hit it, be like, they don't really. They say it.
they're honest.
Yell. Show me one Palestinian leader, one who says Israel has a right to exist. Don't tell me we want to make peace. Just say we have a right to exist. No one. No one's even saying that we have a right to exist.
You talk about there being one Israel, and obviously, we're talking under the auspices of One Israel Fund, because that's some of the battle that we're having here is not just against the haters of Israel, but the haters within Israel. Because even within our own people and even within Israelis, we have people who don't understand the importance of continuing life in Judea and Samaria, that we are, to some degree, we call ourselves the shachpats, like the bulletproof vest of the country, that what goes on here is what keeps Tel Aviv safe. When the soldiers are in Hebron, they're not just protecting the people in Hebron or the people who want to go visit the tomb of the patriarchs. They're making sure that the terror cells in Hebron don't go out towards Tel Aviv, which they have in the past. You mentioned that you were in Sarona last week or this morning, right? And that's, so we're so much more than people understand. And that's part of the reason why this fund had to exist, is because even Jewish organizations that have no compunction about putting up a soup kitchen in the Ukraine, and I'm not saying that in the Ukraine the Jews don't need a soup kitchen, will stop at the so-called Green Line and not do things for some of the people that I think are really the most magnificent people that I've ever met. 100%. You talk about trauma, you talk about, I go to places where people have every reason to not get out of bed in the morning 100%. Because terrible things have happened, or they're worried about where they're living, and what they do in order to battle back is they do.
Yeah.
Just by living where we live, just by educating our children, just by being optimistic, just by having faith, for whatever that means in whatever, your value system is, that there's a bigger picture here, and that each one of us in our little way has to do something to make the world a better place. I don't know on a cosmic level where it's going, but if everybody just takes it upon themselves to get on the side of good, then collectively we make a difference. And you talked about the importance of names and how it turned out that presciently your parents gave Ari a name that turned out to be his epitaph. I don't know what it was. So I think about it in terms of the name that they gave you also. Hillel and Shammai were the two, one of the Zugot. They were the pair of rabbis that's maybe better known than any other pair of rabbis, and it comes up all the time, and they have differences of opinion on how things should be done and how things should not be done. And we usually go with Beit Hillel, who is seen as the more mellow one, but that's erroneous. He was the one, I think, who brought people in, who understood that there was a way of doing things, but if people weren't going to do it, then it was irrelevant. And I see that maybe with what you're doing here, that you're all about the people. You love the country, you love the people, but your passion, and I think this is also maybe how you got out of your depression. And in terms of the sadness, it's never going to go away, and maybe it shouldn't. You lost your brother. And that's always going to be there until, you're 120. But how you fight back against the evil that killed him is by creating more good and creating Israel, making people understand really the truth about Israel.
So I'm going to tell you something I've never said publicly, but I think it's because you were talking about my name. This is another chill-inducing thing. One of my therapists said to me, "So what's your full name?" So I told her my full name. Before I tell you my full name, we talked about this before, how I love Firgun. I love praising other people. And she said to me, before she asked me my name, she said, "So you've built a career out of elevating other people. What does that make you feel?" And I said, I feel whole. When I do that, I feel whole. I love helping other people. I feel whole. I feel like my life is complete. Ready for my full name? You're not going to believe it. Hillel, which means to praise. Chaim, living. Shlomo, shalem.
Wow.
That's my name.
And peace.
Can you imagine?
Wow.
Hillel, Chaim, Shlomo. It's unbelievable. I never thought about it until she pointed it out to me. But about the topic that you said that about our enemies from within, I got to tell you, and this is, again, the anger that I feel towards, I don't want to use the word self-hating Jew, but towards people that are anti-religious, anti-Israel, angers me substantially more than our enemies. I've had smart people, really, really smart people that I respect tremendously on the professional side, say to me, "Why are we here? We should be in Uganda. I don't know what we're doing here."
Wow.
Literally, I'm not exaggerating. He said that to me. Not to mention, forget about Judea and Samaria. I can tell you that the Ari's Shiva, I'm not going to mention names, of course, but a very famous singer who has a lot of respect for my dad, it's a whole long story, came to the Shiva. And this woman is about as anti-religious as anybody you could think of. Like, she is super anti, like angrily anti-Judaism.
It's an emotional thing.
Yeah.
It's not
She
just.
came to Efrat for the first time in her life. She went over the Green Line, and she came into the house, and I said, "So she's like, this is beautiful." She couldn't believe it. So I'm not saying she's going to come back again, but you know what? It's just I got to tell you something. I was in the Canary Islands 3 weeks ago. Okay, Canary Islands was running a campaign with the state of Israel where they were bringing in Israeli bloggers to promote the Canary Islands to the Israeli population. So
We should do that with the people from Canary Islands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was me, a food blogger, a travel blogger, and a lifestyle blogger, I think, or something like that. Not going to get into it, but I was, let's just say, culturally way out of my comfort zone. They were all like super secular Tel Aviv people, like,
Different lifestyle than you.
let's just leave it at that. And as you can imagine, there's no kosher food on Canary Islands. So we had Chabad bring me food, but I'm sitting with these guys, all Israeli. First of all, eating pork, eating octopus, eating like without even like thinking twice. It wasn't even. And then we started to talk, and they're like, we've never been exposed to religious people. They're like, so are you Haredi? Are you ultra Orthodox? We're like, no.
They don't know the nuances at all.
No, and I'm like, culturally, I'm much closer to you than I am to an ultra Orthodox. Like, they just didn't get it, and so it's very very sad
We've work
for
to
me.
do.
It's very sad for me that there are so many Israelis who not only don't know anything about religion, but what they do know, they hate. And I got to tell you, it's not our fault, but I don't think we're doing a good enough job.
Right.
You know, and I'm obviously not going to get into specific whatever, but like I'll just give you one example. The other day when I was talking about that story that happened to me with Waze, and I said, had I made a wrong turn, I would have been lynched. And I in the comments or something, I said, when was the last time a Jew lynched an Arab? And unfortunately, one of the people who's anti-Israel posted that thing of when that Arab was burned 8 years ago.
The one, yeah.
That one story, which me and you can agree was horrible. Like,
Right.
There's no normal person that would say that that's not horrible.
Right.
Whereas at the other side, they give out candies.
Yeah.
You understand the difference? So,
I totally do.
but when Jews act that way, it causes all of us damage.
Yes, it
Because
does.
now it gives our enemies ammunition.
Right.
So yeah, listen, it's a complicated situation. I always say, half jokingly, but maybe not jokingly, that if there's ever going to be peace in the Middle East, it will be technology that's the peacemaker. Because technology is a consensus.
Yep.
Everyone agrees that technology is technology. Who knows?
But in the meantime, as individuals, we have to do what we can do. And
not kid ourselves, though. We have to know
not
what we're up
kid
against.
ourselves.
We can't
Yeah.
lie to ourselves.
We
We're
know
not
we're
making
up
peace
against.
with people who teach their kids that killing Jews is the most important thing in the world.
Right.
There's no peace to be made.
Right.
Educate your kids. Golda Meir's famous quote: "When they love their kids more than they hate us, right? That will be the end of the conflict.
Yeah.
Tomorrow we will say, let's make peace.
Yeah.
Put down our guns. What will happen? There'll be no Israel.
Right.
They put down their guns. There'll be peace.
Right.
Maybe someone watching might think I'm oversimplifying. I'm not. Literally tomorrow, if the Palestinians, the Arabs, put down their weapons and say, let's make peace, the next day there will be peace. And I'll tell you more than that. They will have a Palestinian state more than what they want. Because, look, Omar offered them 98%, and they said no.
Right.
So if they really put down their guns, there will be peace. Period. That's the solution. Unfortunately, it's not even their mental, they're teaching their kids that Jews are pigs. And this girl last week, 15-year-old girl
Right.
going to school, decided to stab a mother pushing a baby carriage. Like, how much hate do you have to have, poison in your heart to do that?
Look, I think one of the things we learn as we get older is you can't really change other people. If you're lucky, you can work on yourself.
Right.
And so one of the things that I know that I do personally, and that's also why I'm involved with this organization, is we just have to better ourselves. We have to strengthen ourselves. We have to better ourselves. We have to keep an eye on our goal. Hopefully the other people around us will fall into line. They'll wake up. They'll have some kind of epiphany. They'll need clean water. I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's because out of love for us, out of need for us, irrelevant to me. But in the meantime, we've got to raise our kids with knowing what's right,
Correct.
how to behave decently, how not to become like the other,
100%.
and to build communities and of faith, but also to literally build these communities and be solid and make sure that we continue on to the future. And whatever happens around us, a lot of it is totally out of our
100%,
control.
100%.
But what is in our control, we have to double down.
Correct. And I think, again, how could you blame our enemies when within ourselves we're not
Yes.
sure about the fact that we deserve this land?
Right.
And so, of course, I'm not saying our enemies are righteous, amazing people, but they smell the weakness. They know that we're so weak. They know that half our country
Well,
doesn't.
part of it is like almost a national depression. Like we got beaten down and told that we were not good people for so long that somehow that infiltrated into our brains. But this is the heart of our people. This is the physical heart of our people, and it's also the beating heart of our people. And you open up the Tanakh at all these places. I mean, when I go around as a tour guide with Jews and Christians, okay, the people who you read it and you see what happened in these places and the lessons that came out of these places, the mistakes that were made in these places, and the people who lived in them, and this is so much more than anybody understands. I mean, the very air that we breathe is just saturated with so much.
And what frustrates me, again, I know I got way too political today, but it just, I'm a guy, listen, Ari, what was his main line was truth. Tell the truth, even if it's bad, by the way, but tell the truth.
Right.
And like the global narrative about Israel, what are you talking about, occupation? What are you there's not a Jew in Gaza. They ethnically cleansed Gaza. Not one Jew.
Right. And still.
Not one. 10,000 rockets. What? The Palestine, again, the Arab population, the growth looks like this. What kind of apartheid are that? What are you even talking about?
It's absurd.
There's no, occupation. What occupation was there in 1929 in Hebron? There was no state of Israel, and we were massacred. Right. What were we massacred? Because they saw that in 20 years we're going to occupy. It's absurd, and it's just it's laughable. But
no, but there's really some insidious evil in there that we have to constantly fight by doing whatever we can.
But what frustrates me is you could tell them the truth from now till you're blue in the face. They just aren't listening. They want to believe this occupation thing. What are you even talking about? Let's talk facts. I'm passionate. Leave my passion on the side. Tell me what we occupied. When was the Palestinian Arab state founded? Who was the prime minister? What was the currency? What was the national anthem? Tell me. I want to know facts.
Yeah, but most people don't know their history and don't care.
It's just unbelievable.
And it's like the wave of political correctness.
Jesus was Palestinian. Are you for real? Seriously. It's just the Talmud says, as you know, that before Mashiach, before Messiah comes, the world's going to be backwards.
Yeah.
I want to believe that that's what's happening. Everything's backwards. So I hope it's a light at the end of the tunnel. Who knows?
Coming from somebody who has a good eye for what organizations and what businesses are worthy of support and what are maybe another day. What do you feel about One Israel Fund?
So there's a famous Mishnah, I believe, Emor me'at v'aseh harbeh, right? Stop talking so much and do. Right. I built my whole career on that. I don't promise anything, I just deliver. And that's how I view One Israel Fund, because while I'm sure many of the people watching this, or if I'd go over to 10 people on the street and say, what's One Israel Fund? 9 of them never heard of it. And that's good, because that's by design, because you don't focus on PR. You focus on doing. And what you do are things that this community of Judea and Samaria needs more than anything. Whether it's security, whether it's enhancing the quality of life and bringing more people here. I can't think of a more important mission than this, right? Because as you said before, this is the buffer. Yeah. And while I don't mean to throw anyone under the bus, but the folks that live in Tel Aviv, I love them, they're great. They view these settlements as this taboo thing. They don't realize that you are saving their lives on a daily basis, and that's not an exaggeration. So anything that can facilitate better quality of life and more security in Judea and Samaria has my vote.
But in the meantime, you, Hillel Fuld, are doing what you can really to put Israel on the map. Okay, physically on the map, staying on the map. I mean, we're here, but in any way that you can with your connections. And I'm sure that you don't even realize that the people that you've affected and connected who came to Israel because of some tip you gave them about some company that was going public, or I don't know what it was that they should invest. And then they've gone back and they've talked to other people. We don't know. We probably don't know 90% of what we do. It's true. The waves that come off of what we do. Yes, that's why I said that.
Literally thousands of messages from people saying, I loved your brother. I said, oh, you met him? No. Did you ever speak to him? No. No. Millions of people that he impacted without even saying a word to them. It's unbelievable.
Exactly. So we have to keep that going.
Yes, we
and just make sure that this continues. Because this is probably the greatest story that humanity, you're a writer.
Israel is the best startup in history
ever written. And it is a zchut. It is a complete privilege to be a part of it.
100%.
And I want to thank you for joining me here today and for everything that you do. And that you should keep doing that. And keep being honest. I think your honesty, and sometimes I'll read something that you posted and I'll think, that must have been so hard for him to write because I'm having a hard time reading it.
Yeah. The truth sometimes is very hard. It's very hard.
But
by the way, again, I said it before.
And it comes at a cost.
At a big cost.
I know it comes at a cost.
There are many people out there who are not happy to see me succeed. Let's just say that as an understatement.
Right. Well, there's jealousy and there's whatever.
Unfortunate. It's very unfortunate, but that's human nature.
Yeah. And your family and everything else. And I'm sure that it is. And the Fuld name is known for a lot of different reasons. But I know it's one you carry with pride, and that you're raising your kids in that way also, which is eventually really the ultimately best thing that we do is to keep that going to the next generation. So I want to thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for being involved with Winnezo Fund and helping, get the word out and doing what we can to keep
the
this
world a better
place
place.
going and to make the world a better place.
Amen.
Because it's in our hearts and it's in our souls.
And it's in our
Thank
ability.
you. And it's in our ability. Exactly.
Thank you.